Thank you for joining us. Throughout history, the Jewish people have endured persecution and exile until the rebirth of the modern state of Israel. During centuries of dispersal, Jewish people sought refuge in the few countries that welcomed them. One of these is China, one of the very few to save many thousands of European Jews before and during World War II. To tell us more about this important part of history are Dr. Xu Xin of the School of Foreign Studies and Director of the Center for Judaic Studies at Nanjing University in China. Joining us also is Dr. Beverly Friend of Oakton College, following these messages.
I read Life Extension magazine to keep abreast of medical discoveries that can literally save my life. Life Extension's track record dating back to 1980 shows that they are decades ahead of conventional medicine in identifying proven methods to prevent and treat the diseases of aging. Reading Life Extension magazine will empower you to take control over your health and longevity. And as a special favor to me, the Life Extension Foundation will give a free 1-year subscription to anyone today. Just call the number on this screen to obtain your free Life Extension subscription. There's no cost, no obligation, just the opportunity to discover solid options to live longer and better. Call the number on the screen today to start receiving Life Extension magazine each month.
Take charge of your health. Get your free subscription to Life Extension magazine now by calling toll-free 1-800-509-9117 or visit www.lef.org.
My grandparents escaped the Nazis in Vienna and went to Shanghai. So did 16,000 other German and Austrian Jews. This book is my attempt to tell their story, or really to let them tell their own stories. It's a book of oral history based on a dozen interviews that I've done with former refugees who've told their whole story, from deciding to go to Shanghai, taking a boat, that's what this picture is here, getting off the boat in Shanghai, creating a new life in Shanghai, surviving the war, and then eventually coming to the United States. The book is available online from Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can order it at your bookstores. If I may say so, I found these stories fascinating to listen to when I first heard the refugees talk. I found it fascinating to put them together in this book. I think you'll find this book interesting to read and revealing about Jewish life in Shanghai.
With us now is Professor Xu Xin from China, Nanjing University, in fact, and Dr. Beverly Friend also. It's a pleasure to have you back on the show.
Glad to be here.
Lovely to be here.
And it's unusual that we are starting our program this way with your friend Irving's mandelbread. It's Passover, so we're having coffee and some mandelbread here. It's just a wonderful way to begin a show. But to get back to business, this is a really interesting time in history, and it is a real privilege to have you, Dr. Xu Xin, with us. What brings you back to the United States again at this time?
Well, chiefly I've been invited by UCLA to give lectures and have exchange program with professors there. Of course, more important, I've been invited by Dr. Friend to come here attend Seder. That's why I came before Pesach this year. So now we had Seder in Chicago and I came here.
25 years ago, the Chicago Tribune came and covered our Seder and had a picture of Xu Xin leading the Seder with us in Chicago. And he's been now, I think this is the 4th or 5th time he's been here, but we have the picture from the Tribune 25 years ago.
Professor Xu Xin actually led a Seder, you say?
With my daughter in Chicago 25 years ago, and the Tribune heard about it and then came in because they thought it was so unique to have a Chinese professor at the Seder with us. And we have our Seders always in a hotel, so it was a goodly number of our family and friends, and it was beautiful.
You know, it's Interesting. This is our third interview, Professor, and we have covered some of the same questions, but I can't help myself but share with our audience whatever made you, a professor in Nanjing University, decide that you want to spend a lifetime studying Judaism of all things?
Yeah, I think because of the attraction created by Jews or Jewish culture, which really attracted me, so that I travel along this road. And when you test something, you like it, you want to have more. So you go further down. That's how brought me here in the last 25 years.
And Saul Bellow was an impetus, winning the Nobel Prize.
Tell us about that.
Well, Shushin found out he won the Nobel Prize, and when he was teaching a course in literature. He's an English professor, and he told us that when he looked at Bellow and saw how many Jews had won prizes and awards in relation to the number in the population, it impressed him. So he started a course in Jewish American authors. And my husband, teaching in China, was the first Jew he ever actually met. And Jim was out of Temple Sinai, which blew a trumpet rather than a shofar on the high holidays. They were super, super reform.
How interesting that is. But wait a minute. You've known Professor Shushin for how many years now?
Since 1986. When my husband went to teach in China.
Yeah, 1985, actually.
Okay, but I came in 86. I've known you since 86. Jim came in 85 to teach there.
Yeah.
He was invited to teach at Nanjing.
How very heartwarming all of this is. And of course, speaking of that, brings us back, of course, to history. And speaking of the term heartwarming, something that was sorely lacking during World War II. However, China was one country that gave sanctuary to so many thousands of Jews when no country would save their lives. Professor, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is one of the things that China is proud of today. During the Second World War, and Jewish refugees from Central Europe, both Germany and Austria in particular, up to Kristallnacht, they couldn't go anywhere because of the quota system, and then Jews cannot go to many other countries. But China, especially Shanghai, is an open port city. Anyone who has a passport, you don't need documents, you don't need a visa, you don't need something to prove you have money. If you get a ticket of boat, sail from Italy to Shanghai, you can land it. So by thousands, within 2 to 3 years, came to Shanghai. That makes the largest Jewish community in Shanghai during wartime. It is estimated was 25,000 Jews came to China if we consider that during Second World War, or from 1933 when Hitler came to power until 1945. But majority of them arrived from 1937 to 1940. After Pacific War broke out, there's almost no chance for Jews to come. Maybe there was few individuals, but by and large, most Jews or Jewish refugees today we consider will arrive from 1937 to 1940. Previously, there were many Jewish professionals, especially like musicians, professors, doctors, lawyers, was persecuted in Germany. When Hitler came to power, they realized something wrong, so they came. Those were professionals, and they came to Shanghai who become like either doctors, lawyers, or any kind of the profession. They could find a job or place in Shanghai, and many of them played an important role.
And were enabled to survive the war. You know, it's a painful subject because my grandfather, Paul Blumenfeld, was a Berlin lawyer, and my uncle, Richard, after whom I'm named, they tried to escape to Switzerland, and the Swiss sent them back to die. Had they moved to China, I would have had a family. Today, there's no one left except my children and so forth. But anyway, so I'm so very, very impressed with the kindness and humanity and friendship that China has extended. And I hope programs like this will help create even more dialogue between the great nation of China and the United States and the rest of the world, and of course Israel.
But you know, with the Holocaust survivors getting older and older and fewer of them, one of the things I think that's remarkable is that Shushan is keeping the history of this alive. And not, I don't think it dies so much in the West, but for China to know, to China to be aware, for the students there to know their own history and the history of the Jews with them. That is, I think, his unique one of his unique contributions in terms of Nanjing University and the Center for Jewish Studies there, that they become aware of these things. Otherwise, I don't think the Chinese who were not in Shanghai were aware of the Jews being anywhere on their borders or in their borders in any fashion. There were so few Jews and so many Chinese. So I think he's a really a troubadour, bringing all this information to people who would never otherwise know of it, and it would be lost.
And not only that, he's authored so many books in Chinese
Yes.
and in English. Tell us about your book, sir.
Well, the earliest book, Encyclopedia Judaic Chinese Edition, I prepared in the late 80s and published in 1993, and which becomes a major reference book for Chinese who, if they want to do Jewish studies. And of course, I wrote books on anti-Semitism, because that subject Chinese wanted to know very much, but not to know much. So the book was published in 1997, and also I published books on Jewish culture, which becomes the major textbook in Chinese college students. And recently, just a week before I came here, I have another book published called On Jewish Culture. The culture here means like Jewish civilization, to cover it from religion or life and people, and then literature, anything was covered. Because in China you say culture is more acceptable than you say religion.
You know, he's talking about books written in Chinese, but he also wrote books in English. He wrote Legends of the Chinese Jews of Kaifeng. He wrote about the Chinese Jews of Kaifeng for an English-speaking audience. And his encyclopedia is extraordinary because all diplomats who go to Israel are given a copy of this so they'll become familiar with the country that they're going to visit, which is, you know, remarkable educational work for them, to a resource for them to understand the culture that they're going to see.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when the book gets published, most Chinese officials will receive the copy from Israel embassy. And one of the things when Rabbi Arthur Schneier visited China on behalf of President Clinton to pave the way for Clinton's visit in late 90s, because after 1989 Tiananmen issue, no American president ever visited China for 10 years. So Clinton was the first one. He sent Rabbi Arthur Schneier from Park East Synagogue in New York, went to China to look for this human rights religious issue. Then when he prepared his trip, he wanted to introduce Judaism. What to do? He found my book. So he presented the Chinese version, Encyclopedia Judaica, to Chinese President then Jiang Zemin, and took pictures. When I met him afterwards, because he wanted to know who was the author. So at that time I was at Harvard, and I learned the next day when he presented the book to him, and he learned I was there, invited me to his home. He told me what happened when he presented the book to President Jiang Zemin, because they talk about Jews. Jiang Zemin said, no, they're not Jews in China. He said, please read this book. This is my honor. So he presented the book for him. So that is one of the things, and I'm glad the book played a role in such a way. As you mentioned, there were many Chinese now interested in, like you mentioned, Jews who came to Shanghai, and then Michael Blumenthal actually was one of refugees in Shanghai. He came with his family, but then after 10 years, he left Shanghai in 1947 to the United States. In 20 years, he made his way, become Secretary of Treasury during Carter administration. And the story goes even like this. You know, when he became the Secretary of Treasury, he found his old passport, and he wanted to know who gave his visa. He called State Department that person who were consul in Shanghai in 1947 and still around. So he made an appointment, invite him for dinner. That guy did not know why, Blumenthal invited him for lunch. He went anyway. So after the sit down, Blumenthal showed him the passport. They say, "Is this your signature?" You see, then he read that's his signature. He remained the same job, after more than 25 years, and being widely reported. He said, "I got to be damned," when he saw the passport, because a refugee become a Secretary of Treasury. So that's for Chinese. Actually, Michael Blumenthal was invited to come back when China commemorate the 60th anniversary of the ending of Second World War. In Shanghai, he became the keynote speaker to talk about his experience because he himself was a refugee, then made his way up in this way.
Fascinating. And speaking of commemoration, my friend Danny Spungen is very interested in coins and so forth. And of course, right now at the present time, China is honoring this entire subject by minting a special commemorative coin. Tell us about this coin, Professor.
Well, because this coin was specifically made for the commemorating of the 70th anniversary of the establishment of Hankyu Ghetto to confine Jews by Japanese authority who controlled Shanghai at that time. Of course, Japanese made that decision because under pressure of their ally at the time, Germany, and they were advised to get rid of or kill those Jews. Japanese authority did not do that because they have their own different understanding of Jews. And the legend says Rabbi Ashkenazi was in Shanghai, and then when Japanese authority learned Germans want to get rid of them, eliminate them, they asked them why Hitler or Nazi hate you. He gave a very smart answers, which scholars believe had great impact on the later history, because he said, because we are ancients. Why, Hitler want to kill Jews? Because we are ancients.
Asian.
Yeah. So because of that, made Japanese think twice, because they are ancient too. You see, the indication or underlined meaning is that after Germans get rid of us, we'll run after you. So that story probably pretty true and being widely circulated. And this is see how those individual Jews was played roles, because the smart answers make Japanese authority do things differently.
That was the head rabbi of the Mir Yeshiva.
The difference between life and death, based on a few words. How fascinating.
Sometimes, yes.
And the whole Mir Yeshiva was the only yeshiva that survived the war, and it survived it in Shanghai. And that was the head rabbi of the Mir Yeshiva who gave the answer. So the yeshiva survived intact, which was nice.
This is so very interesting, and I'd like us to continue, but we have to pause for these messages. We'll be right back. We're back with Dr. Beverly Friend and Professor Xu Xin. I'd like to ask you a question. We've been talking about Shanghai and the Chinese Jewish community in the past, but we haven't spoken about Harbin. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts with regard to the community in that city.
Well, I just made my 7th trip to China, and I'd never gone to Harbin, and each time I'd said I'd like to go to Harbin, and it was an amazing experience. Not just because Jews lived there during the pogroms of the Russian Revolution and worked on the railroad, but because they made such an enormous impact on the city. And when you are in the downtown area, every plaque on a building that was Jewish extols the Jews that were there and says what they brought to the civilization, that they brought industry and that they brought culture and that they brought information. And there's a museum in the synagogue there, and the plaques are good size. And they just go on and on about, for example, there was a music school there. And from the Chinese press, not the Israeli press, the Chinese press talks about how Chinese musicians learned from the Jewish musicians from Russia, and they brought Western music to China. And a small group left an enormous impact on the city in terms of industrialization. There are no Jews there now, but it was such an interesting place to visit and to see the respect which the Jews were held there. And that is something I, even as a Jew and as a Westerner, I knew nothing about. And I think most people don't know. And it was just an amazing experience. And Shushan has been, furthering that information too. Not just Kaifeng, not just Shanghai, but Harbin as well. These three, sort of a triumvirate of Jewish experiences in China. Three important segments.
After I jumped into the Jewish field, I realized I got to learn more about Jews in China, both in pre-modern time, like Kaifeng Jews, which under my study, and also Jews who came to China since modern time. By that I mean since 1840. And not only Jews in Shanghai, in Nanjing, but also in Harbin. Perhaps I'm one of the first Chinese scholars who ever published an article in Chinese journal, or we're talking about academic journal, in 1990s about Kaifeng Jew, about Harbin Jews. Later on, especially in 2000, because relationship between China and Israel, and then the Chinese government supported the program in Heilongjiang province, where Harbin was the capital, and then to study Harbin Jews. What Dr. Beverly just mentioned, and then was exhibition prepared by Academy of Harbin Social Sciences. They gave very good exhibition. That exhibition has been traveling many countries in the world now, especially in Israel, America. And now more and more people go to Harbin to visit that place.
Richard, you should go. You should take your cameras and you should go, because it's an extraordinary experience.
It's because more important, there's a Jewish cemetery, the biggest in Asia, you see, was still there. Over 800 tombstone there. Many prestigious people were buried there. For instance, Ahmed, former Prime Minister of Israel, his grandfather were buried there.
Interesting. I didn't even know that.
Oh, no, it's an amazing place.
Ahmed. Mm-hmm. This is such an interesting subject matter. We could talk about it for hours, I presume. Mm-hmm. I'd like to ask you, actually, back here in the States, Beverly, you are a professor right here in the college. Tell us about what you do generally.
Well, Shushan is my cottage industry. When he was going to do the Encyclopedia Judaica, they needed to raise $10,000 because they didn't think it would be a bestseller. It had to be self-supporting. And I tapped every friend and relative in my life to get the $10,000, and we got it. And I put out a newsletter to tell people what happened to their money. And I got a letter from the Harvard Nanjing Library subscribing to my one-issue newsletter. I was teaching at Oakton Community College, and I went to the dean, and they subsidized it. So for 9 years, we put out this newsletter twice a year. We got 700 people and 9 libraries. 2 of the libraries were in Russia. Now I do this all online. I am a professor of English and journalism, but as I retired, I moved more and more into the feeling of the more two groups of people know about each other, the more likely they are to understand each other and not to have any anti-Semitism or any hatred. And so my goal is really to further what Shushan is doing, mainly with the Center for Judaic Studies at Nanjing University, because he's graduating 18 students who have their doctorates, each of whom studies in Israel for a year, which is remarkable. And then what happens to them? They go off to other universities and teach courses in Judaica. It's like Johnny Appleseed. It spreads and it spreads and it spreads, and it's just wonderful. And this is such a small thing, but it's like ripples in the water, you know. We are making an inroad. People in China, particularly the scholars, but even the man on the street knows more than he knew before about, well, as Shushan said, not to understand Jews is not to understand Western civilization. We are an integral part of history, the Jews. And it's important to know if they want to know about the West and to know about history. So I feel that we are, missionaries on a road showing people what existed historically. And that's enormously worthwhile, more worthwhile than teaching English literature.
Actually, to me, Beverly is a person really the first person to take action to get support. When we start Jewish program, we couldn't get funding from my university or state at that time, and so we need some kind of support. She's the one to mobilize her friends, and through this institute today we call the Glazer Institute of Jewish and Israel Studies today, and we were there for over 20-some years. Last year we just celebrated 20th anniversary, but the support were all from Jewish Foundation. It's a good example to show Chinese, if you have good cause, I get support, but also to show Jews like charitable tradition to support this program like us.
He said he learned about tzedakah from us.
Yeah, yeah. Today, because she's a person, she really built a bridge. The first person, edited newsletter, as she mentioned, to cross wide range. A lot of people supported us because of her effort. And also the website, we had the website for China Judaic Studies Association, being there over 10 years. In China, if we look the history, the website of ours was the first one, actually probably among other Chinese. You see, this is how the role she played. And she kept visiting us, and now she is honorary director of our institute.
This is also very exciting and very important. I would like to see your program continue. I would like to contribute to it. I believe that lecturing, as you both do, and writing books and giving courses and producing doctoral students and graduates, all of this is terribly important, and I believe that even more should be done, and I would be honored to assist you in this. It's been a real pleasure having you back on the program, Professor, and you, Beverly.
Great
having you. This concludes our special show for today from On Location in South Florida. I'm Richard Peritz. Thank you for being with us.